I'm Suzy Lewis. I'm here on the Vine Skills team. I work primarily with automations, so folks who would like to improve and optimize their Filevine environment with extra workflows. And then I also help out with Domo Periscope, so I kind of have two hats on that way, but for today, I'm gonna kind of just be walking through the basics of automations. What do we mean when we talk about automations? When is it best to automate something? When is it best to look at native Filevine features or even manual use? And then kind of the basics from there, right? So we're gonna look in our automation platform, kind of give you the basics start to finish. How do you build a really basic automation? What does that process look like? Kind of all of the different steps there, from creating a PAT or a personal access token. Hopefully, maybe you guys saw my Tip Tuesday on it, but I'll be going through that again live just because that's always step one with automations, and then kind of going through the whole thing. So, like Jasmine said, if you have any questions while we're walking through? This is going to be pretty informal, so I'm happy to kind of stop and try and answer a question if anybody has any as we go. But we can kind of go from there. So I am just going to get started kind of talking about that first question. What are automations? Obviously, especially kind of in this day and age, automations can mean a lot of things, right? So what we mean when we say automations, when we're talking about it in respect to Filevine, are Filevine-to-Filevine workflow kind of processes. That's going to be like 90%, like really the bulk of what we're doing. We do sometimes automate, or another term can be integrate with other third-party softwares, right? Think the Google Suite or QuickBooks or something like that. So where you're taking Filevine information to another software or another software's information into Filevine, that's definitely part of it. But the bulk of what I'm going to be talking today is those Filevine to Filevine processes, right? How can we improve how we're going through our projects in Filevine to make them quicker, to make them more consistent, and basically give people time back to work on, what they're good at, what they really need to be focusing on. So that's kind of the general what are automations. The platforms we use for automations are also kind of important to consider. So we work with a few here at Vine Skills. So the main ones we work with are Workato. So that's a platform sold through Filevine. I'll be showing some of that today. We also work with Zapier. Zapier's another third-party automation software if you're interested in getting up and running. Maybe if you're newer to the idea of automations and kind of want to try some stuff out yourself, Zapier can be a great platform for that. There's already a built-in Filevine connection there, so that can be kind of fun to play around with. And then, of course, there's also Lois Workflows. You might have also heard it called Foundry. Lois Workflows is going to be the updated kind of terminology for that. And that's kind of Filevine's proprietary platform that they've recently built out. It's very new. I'm not going to be walking through that just yet, since we're still kind of getting our sea legs in that platform as well. So hopefully stay tuned for a future free help and we'll walk through that with you guys. But those are kind of the main platforms we use when we're building out automations. There's, of course, technically the option some people could connect with the API on something else that's third party, right? They could build out their own proprietary coding software, right? One thing to consider with that is, with the three platforms I just mentioned, they're already approved by Filevine, and you'll kind of see when I walk through creating that PAT that if you don't have that, that can really kind of slow down the process of getting building with Filevine. So that's the kind of general what are automations? What do we mean when we're talking about automations? Where are we building them? I don't think I'm seeing any questions on that just yet, so I'll just kind of jump through to the next thing I was going to talk about, which is kind of when do we automate something in Filevine and what does that look like? So we work with folks, all across different industries. We work with personal injury firms, we work with corporate entities, we work with people who have their own complete custom setup in Filevine. So really, the sky's the limit. All of the work that we do with automations is purely custom. We don't have like a running list that people pick from. We work with people directly to kind of look at the system that you've built in Filevine to see where can we jump in, where can we kind of interject and improve things. Because everybody's Filevine is different. That's what makes Filevine really cool and helpful for everyone is you can build it out just the way you need. So we build out kind of similarly custom solutions. So when you're in your Filevine, kind of what we like to think about when we're thinking about what is helpful to automate is what is something that's happening in each of your Filevine projects with a standard start or trigger. You'll hear me kind of use the word trigger a lot as we move on. That is always triggered in the same way. It always kind of kicks off the same way, and then has just a set logic, right? So that can be a number of things, right? A set trigger can be when we're moving into a new Filevine phase. It can be when a piece of data gets entered into a section or a new collection item is created, right? Those are the kind of different triggers that we can look for when we're making an automation. And then the second part, of course, is just, is there a logical set of steps that needs to happen after that, right? So, for example, say we need to calculate a certain deadline, right? Filevine will let you calculate with numbers, math, but we don't necessarily have the ability to calculate with dates in native Filevine. So we can do that in an automation. We can look for when a date is entered in your Filevine system. When that gets saved, we can look at it and say, this date has now been entered. Let's look at that date and say, we need to enter a deadline that's going to be in 2 months or in 2 years. And then from there, we can customize it even further. I have a lot of firms or, different companies that will say, that's great. Shouldn't fall on a weekend. That's not going to be super helpful for my folks. So we can add like extra steps as well to make sure, hey, this falls back. Kind of similar, we can say, hey, whenever this moves into a certain phase, I have a new kind of corresponding section where I need people to come in and enter information. So it could have been that we didn't need that section beforehand, so I can reveal that section in our section list on the left-hand side. And then maybe also go ahead and send a note out to that person saying, we are now in this phase. Based on your role, it is time for you to go in and enter X amount of information. We can take things from there. Things to consider, right? Those are just some examples, right? Obviously, there's a lot we can do, but you want it to be something that a user in Filevine can do. Automations aren't necessarily about changing how Filevine looks or the basics of how it operates, right? We're not going to be putting new pop-ups up, right? There's not going to be a new pop-up window that comes up. Basically, these automations are acting like their own user. They technically do have their own user, and they're coming in and taking these actions for your firm. So hopefully that makes sense.
Suzy, a question did come in.
Great.
They're wanting to create an automation trigger that will link with a third-party review gathering program. What are ways to do that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, an automation trigger that could work with a third-party review platform. Not super familiar on the review gathering platforms, but we've worked with a lot of people. So, depending on what that kind of looks like, at the end, that, probably at the end of your project life cycle, right? You've done excellent work. You want it to show on Google. Um, if you have a section already in place that kind of tracks some of those end actions in your project, right? Maybe if you're a firm, you're tracking when your disbursement has gone out to clients, or you're tracking that extra information. There's kind of two options there. One could be that you're just looking for a certain phase, right? That would be super general. So some people have like a closing phase ahead of archived, and then closing could mean like it's gone through the whole case life cycle. That could just go directly out. That's a little more general than I personally like, because a lot of the times, you can go through a project. Maybe that client didn't end up getting being a good fit, or they were unresponsive, or you know whatever it was, and you have to put it through closing, but you don't actually want to send them out. They're not a good match to send out to reviews. So my preference in those cases is to add in a new task flow trigger button. So it would be something, that kind of looks like an email button. You can add them into your template, and then you can use that as your trigger, where you can say, gather, send to review platform, right? I should be more creative than that. But basically, you can add a button, and that way, it gives a little more controls back to your users, back to your staff, to say, this is actually a great candidate. We really want to gather this review. I'm going to press this button while I'm going through all of my other closeout procedures, right? That does make it a little more manual, but I like to kind of think about, what is a good mix between having something fully automated and still having your team have control, right? Because hopefully, your team has great judgment, right? They're looking through the case, they're familiar with it. They can kind of determine it from there. Is that kind of what we were going for? Any kind of follow-up?
We'll wait for it to come in, but another question did pop up
Great.
regarding the lead docket automation tab. They understand that this feature needs to be activated by the lead docket or Filevine team. How does the automation usage count in terms mention, like the terms mention 1,000 automation actions per user per month? Do messages, task creation, status updates each count as separate automation actions? Or if one automation sends an email, creates a task, and updates a status, would that count as three individual or just one?
That's a great question. So, lead docket automations, that wasn't included in like the first list of automations that I was talking about, but it is kind of a separate offering for you to build out automations within lead docket. And admittedly, I am not sure on the usage system for lead docket automations. We have a lead docket team. I would be happy to follow up with them about that, because I'm sure that they're more familiar. But to give you an example of what that looks like in the other platforms that I have mentioned, Zapier, Workato, and Lois Workflows, all are on a usage system where it's not per run necessarily, it's per action taken within each job run. So, say I have an automation that triggers whenever I move to an active phase, for example. So if every project that I have is just going to move into that active phase once, and say I've got 500 projects, that would run 500 times probably over the course of the year, right? Really rough math. But if my automation is doing two actions every time it runs, then it's actually going to be using 1,000 tasks. if that makes sense. So that's how it is for the other platforms I work with. Again, I don't want to blanket apply that to how lead docket automations are priced because I'd like to double check that. But that's kind of an example of how these kind of commonly get priced. So good question. Okay. Anything else? Is that our docket of questions for now?
Yeah, there's somebody else wrote something in the chat. Can you elaborate on that? Maybe I missed it. The HTTPS.
HTTPS.
Maybe they're talking about links. Okay. I'll do some digging and let you know if it's an actual question or something.
Okay, sounds good. Okay. Um, Moving forward, picking up from where I left off, thinking about when we do our automations, again, we just want to make sure that we've got a set time that we start and that they're all going to follow a set logic within the bounds kind of what we'd have our users do, right? Obviously, our automation, it's going to be a bit quicker, it's going to be really consistent, but it's still going to mostly be within the bounds of what our users can do as well. If we would like to get kind of more in the specifics of that, um, let's see. I'll get this pulled up. We can also reference our API documentation. So just to share this here, I'll share my screen just so you guys can see what this page looks like. Can you guys see my API documentation here?
Yes.
Okay, so this is Filevine's API documentation site. This is open for everyone. It's not like tied to a specific environment, like, for example, Lead Dockets automation. Their API documentation, you do have to kind of be in your system. This, anybody can look at this. You don't have to have a Filevine account or anything, but this will give you a lot of the basics of both how to work with Filevine's API and what actions are actually available with the API. So if you're in here, there's a lot of helpful information, but just in terms of thinking about what we can actually achieve with an automation, it's helpful, I find, at least. This is the best way to look at it if you're not already in Workato, if you're not already in Zapier, to come in here and say, okay, I actually want to make, for in this case, an item on my Filevine calendar. What availability do I have with that? So I can come here. That's called a project appointment in Filevine. So I can drop this down and I can say, yeah, so I can create a project appointment here. And these are the different kind of things that I can update. So, um, it's not exactly a light read, but if you're looking for specific ideas, if you're looking to kind of validate certain ideas to see if you can do something, this is a great resource to pull up and just say, is there even the option to kind of tackle this in Filevine through an automation or with the API? So there's a lot of different options in here. You can kind of come here and say, hey, what are my options with documents? We got a lot of options there. What are my options with tasks? You've got a lot of different actions that you can take to try and piece together and create these workflows and our automations. So, moving on from there, I was just going to go into kind of a automation 101. If you wanted to try and get something set up for yourself, how would you do it? And then kind of going through the basics of how to flesh out a really basic automation, kind of start to finish, what that would look like, going through some error handling, some documentation, and then hopefully having some just extra time at the end for questions. Again, hop in, love the questions as they come. But I was just going to start once again. I went over this with my Tip Tuesday, but just for the folks that missed that, I wanted to start with walking people through how to make a PAT or a personal access token in Filevine. So the reason we talk about a PAT or a personal access token is for any type of automation, right? In Zapier, in Workato, we need to create this PAT first, and that represents our access to our Filevine, right? It's basically our password to grab things with our automation, take actions with our automations. And those can be built kind of in a combination of our advanced tools and our account manager. So one thing to know if you want to play around with this and you haven't made a PAT before, you do need to have tenant admin access or kind of account manager access might be another way to say it. So that would be if you're in Filevine, if you can go into manage my account and if you see the action for access tokens, then we're pretty good to go. So there's a few different things that we need to get this set up. So to go into advanced, you would kind of come to our top left-hand hamburger menu. This is where I have it. And come down to advanced here. I've already got it pulled up. And then we have our advanced menu here. You can kind of scroll through it. Sometimes, there's a lot of options in here, so you can also just type in. I would first look for integrations. So like I said, going back to what I was saying before, if you have an improved integration, that makes it a lot faster. Zapier's approved, Workato's approved. As you can see, there's a lot of other integrations in here that are also looking to have a PAT. Um, but here, let me pull this up. So I could look up in here Zapier. As you can see, we've already activated Zapier, so I don't have to take that step again. And then I think similarly for Workato, I already have that activated. But if this wasn't activated, you would just see that kind of button here that says activate. And that's just basically alerting Filevine we're activating this in your system. And then from a technical perspective, that just means it's going to be using a certain client secret. um, you don't have to get super in the weeds there. But if you don't have an approved integration, if you're IT, if you're a software developer, just a quick aside to you guys, if you don't have an approved integration, basically you'd be looking to have an extra client secret. And just as a heads up for the time being, those do still have to go through an approval process with Filevine. So you can build it out, but your rate limits will still be 0. So you won't get a lot of successful calls moving forward. That's as a safety precaution through Filevine. There are some folks you can reach out to there to try and go through that approval process. But again, to build out these automations that I've been talking about, they're already approved. You just have to go through and activate them.
Suzy, the tutorial page that you were on just before you came into Filevine, do you mind putting that in the chat?
The API documentation?
Yes.
Yes. Let me grab that for you guys. Here, I'll bring this back up to the welcome page. Grab that for you guys, and I'll just put that in the chat here. There you go.
Thank you so much.
Of course. So, back in our page here, once you've activated your kind of corresponding integration, could be Zapier, could be Workato, you'll want to then go and create a service account for them. So, like I said, we're kind of literally creating an extra user for this automation to use as it takes action. So, like for example, if you're making an audit report, you will be able to see actions your Workato user has taken, right? Just like there any other user at your company. If you're having an automation that creates a task, the author will be the Workato user. So they are kind of a literal user. They are not charged. This isn't related to your licensed users. They're completely separate. They're just for our automations here. So if you come in here to service accounts, you'll come over here to new. And it'll automatically set as an ad hoc service account. Again, that's for anybody who's trying to make like their own integration. But if you drop that down, it'll give you the options for the different integrations you have activated already. So since we've activated Workato and Zapier, we have our options there. You can click that. And I'd recommend just leaving on all permissions, right? If you leave off permissions and you forget to add them, then once you activate it and try and start using it, your user will get denied. So you can just leave on all permissions and then you can create that user there. Again, we've got a ton of users, as you can see, so I won't actually create this one to avoid some clutter, but we can see they have them all here. They'll be automatically named per their own integration. They're given an email like any other Filevine user, and then you can see if they're active and when they were created. And then if you ever do need to come in here, if you stop working on something, you can come in here and edit them. But typically, like I said, they're not licensed or anything, so they're just waiting for you to use the integration. And then once we have those two first steps, so activate our integration, create our service account, we can then go over to our account manager. Again, this is just for folks who have that tenant admin permission. We can pull that up. That'll bring up our account manager here, pull up some information, and then what we're looking for here is our access tokens. So we've got quite a few here, and we're just in this personal access tokens header. And then you can just come over here into new. It'll create a new token here. You want to name this in accordance with the option you're using. So Workato, Zapier, whatever tool you've got going on. So I would say Workato. I would select the corresponding user. So find that user's email here. And then we have our scopes. So the scopes are giving specific levels of access to our user here, to our PAT. So if I just select Filevine API access, I might be able to go in and get project information, but I might not be able to get a payment link, for example. So, go ahead and make sure that you've selected your appropriate scope here. You'll always probably need Filevine API access. There's not a lot you can do without that one. Vitals give you access to specifically pull your vital setup that y'all have made. So since vitals are very customized, there's certain endpoints that do need this scope specifically. There are a lot of time and billing endpoints that are related to payments. Payments has basically its own platform. So if you're doing anything with that, we would need to select payments. Bulk data isn't really something that we need to utilize a lot in automations, right? Since a lot of what we're doing is one-to-one, right? An action comes in, we need to take a corresponding action. Bulk data would be an endpoint that's more often utilized for like a migration of certain types. Webhook access, I like to activate this as well so we can make sure to receive those. And then there is AI API access that's mostly going to, I believe, be utilized with lowest workflows. So once you're done with that, you can create this token. This comes in. I won't reveal this necessarily because I'm basically just going to go ahead and delete it. But as a note, this is the only time this is going to pop up. Once you create it, you have to copy it, save it, hopefully to your password management software if you have one, keep it locked down, and just remember, based on the scopes we've selected, this basically represents access to your entire Filevine. So keep it very secure. You know, we don't want to be emailing it. Uh, Ideally not saving it in a sticky note on our computer. We want to save this somewhere secure. And then once you've done that, you can click Done here. And then once we've done that, you can come in here. And one other thing I'd just like to mention is the tokens are set to expire. This is a safety protocol, right? But you can come in here and say, hey, this is getting close to expiring. I would like to come in here and extend the expiration. And if you don't do that and it does expire, your automations and integrations, whatever you build off of it, they are gonna fail basically until you put in a new one. So um, if you do create them, you will get emails as your paths get close to expiration. They'll tell you which paths are close to expiring, so you can come in here. Again, you could just click on it, do extend the expiration, and it'll move it out a year for you. But that's just one thing to keep in mind, right? Okay. Any questions that's kind of popped up about that?
Nope, no questions so far.
Awesome. Okay. That's kind of step one. We've got to have that done in order to create any automation. Moving from there to show you a little bit of the automation creation process, I'm going to take us into Workato. Again, this is a automation platform supported by Filevine, and just kind of show you a little bit of what this looks like, right? What is the process of adding steps and kind of designing these automations. So I've made this very kind of straightforward kind of template for us to look at here. So this is the Workato builder. Like I said when we were kind of talking about this before, there's always going to be a trigger for our automation. So that's this first block here. And then we have our actions. And then we can decide how we'd like to handle any errors that might pop up in there. So for this, just as an example, I have an automation set up um, currently right now to run just in my test project here. This is my test project for any Lord of the Rings fans who appreciate the reference. I have it set up to just work in this. I like to do this with all of the automations that I create, basically as a way to keep any testing we do locked down. It keeps it specific, so if there are any issues with the automation, they're only going to be affecting one project, right? One thing to kind of consider when you're building automations or considering automations is they can happen pretty fast, right? So if we build something out and we don't test it thoroughly and then turn it on for all of our projects, it could be that errors start popping up, issues. Data could even be wiped. I don't say that to scare anybody, but it's always something we want to kind of stay on top of. So I like to just keep it locked down in one place first, and once we're really happy with it, then it can go on to our whole Filevine environment. So that was kind of my step one here is I'm just looking for when this says form, but this is just a kind of discrepancy between how things are named in the Filevine API and how we talk about things in Filevine itself. So a form to the Filevine API is basically what most people would call a static section, right? So it's not a collection section, it's a static section. So this is looking for when one gets updated, when it gets saved with new information. So we're locking this down to my Lord of the Rings themed test project. I also have a step in here to say that I don't want to have this trigger when the user ID, the person who triggered this automation to start, is that Workato user that we created, right? Because if I have that, and then I also have the automation updating this section, it's just going to keep going, right? And like I said, most of these platforms are charged on a usage basis. So if you accidentally have it just calling itself and repeating over and over again, that'll take up a lot of that usage really fast. From there, I have a section selector entered in here. So this is our intake section that we're looking at. So one thing to consider is a lot of the items in our automations are going to be utilizing our selectors rather than their actual names here. So we have our intake section here, but if you go into our customs editor, for example, you can see that our PI intake section actually does have an intake selector of intake and loss. So just as a good note, it's always helpful to go in here and double check these. Sometimes you can take a guess, it's just not always going to be right. So we're looking at that intake section specifically, and then we're just looking at a certain project type. This one actually doesn't match, but I already had this one inputted in here. So just as an example, I'm looking for a specific project type. So for clients that are using multiple templates in Filevine, it's helpful to make sure that your automations are locked to specific project types because each step is going to look for you to define what project type it should be working in. And then that's our trigger. So if we want to in here, right, I can add a little comment and say, hey, this trigger is intake is updated. And that way, you know, for someone who's just coming in to review something really quick, they don't have to necessarily look at this and digest it. They just can see it. So that's kind of nice. From there, we can go into our actions and we can kind of decide, hey, what do we actually need this automation to do? So if we have this for whenever intake is updated here, we can decide, okay, what information are we trying to take action off of here? It could be that we're looking for this incident date to get added as an example. A lot of folks come in. We have a lot of folks that I've worked with are in a personal injury space, and in those situations, if there's an incident date, we need to think about calculating a statute of limitations date, which is, you know, could be 2 years from the incident. Can get a lot more complicated than that, but for the sake of time, we'll start there. So it could be that we need to take a look at if that incident date's coming in. So we have the trigger set up. I have a first step set up here to look at the project details. These details aren't going to be giving me every single piece of information within the project. This is like the metadata of the project, right? Who is the primary on the project? What is the name of the project? What is the root folder ID of the project, right? This isn't giving me necessarily what our date fields are. So to do that, I would need to come in here and I just add an extra step. I can do action in an app. All of the different apps we have access to kind of pop up as an option. This is really similar to how people use Zapier, different things like that. One thing to consider with that third platform we mentioned, Lowest Workflows, is specifically tied to Filevine. There's no connecting to any other third-party softwares, so you don't really have to worry about choosing Filevine in that case. You can select here. And then this very long option list is kind of tied to that API documentation that I listed earlier. So we've got get user, we've got remove user, reset task flow, all of our kind of different options in here. That being said, one kind of caveat, sometimes options are added to the Filevine API before they're added as an option here. That doesn't mean you 100% can't use that option yet. It just means you'd have to create a custom step for that. So just as a heads up there. But for now, we're going to keep it pretty simple, and we just need to do a get form so we can get the information in our intake section so we can see if we have that incident date. So we can select our project type list here. So I can do personal injury. I think that's the one we actually are using here. We can look at our section selector. Again, this one is actually going to use the named value, so I'm not looking for that intake and loss. I'm looking for intake. And then finally, our project here. So one thing we have to consider is it's going to give us a drop-down option of all of our projects that match this project type. This isn't super helpful for us because if we select one from the list here, it means the automation is only ever going to work on that one project. And that's not really how we want our automations to work. So we change this from select from list to use project ID. And then we can come back in here, look at step one, and grab our data pills. So for example, I'll just come in here, grab the project ID, and now instead of looking for a specific project every time, it's going to say, okay, which project actually triggered this automation? Use the ID from that project and get that information. So that's kind of setting up a first step to get that get information. I'll go ahead and say get intake. That way I know which section we set it up off of. And then from there, I can say, okay, if that, let's see if we can find our incident date. I can just type in here, see if I can find it. Got a few options. We've got our incident date here. Let's see if that I even have that right. We can double check. Yep. We can take that, pull that in here. This is going to be a condition, so we can see, hey, if this is even entered in the first place, right? So I can say if this is present. Nope, present. There we go. We can go from there, and then we can decide if we'd like to go ahead and update. Maybe we have a deadline field that we'd like to enter this in. Maybe we want to kick off a deadline chain to enter this in. For this setup, let's just take a peek here. We don't necessarily have our statute information in the same section, but we might have it somewhere else here. We do have a statute of limitations in our case summaries section here. So I can come in here and say I would actually like to update a form now because that's just another static section. Come in here, we're going to do the same kind of setup processes. We're going to be looking at case summary this time. Project ID. And then we have our list of optional fields. So this is going to be all the fields that we have access to in that section. So since we're updating them, we can decide, hey, what do we actually want to update? So for the purposes of this, I'll just grab our statute of limitations due date here. So I can say, hey, we would like to populate this because our incident date is here. We can come in here and we can actually use, and this is something again that's an option in multiple platforms, we can use a formula, which is basically a little piece of code that we're adding. Don't be too stressed out about it. Zapier, Workato, they all have documentations on these, so you can go to their documentation, look up their formulas, see what's actually appropriate. You'll see this one's not too complicated, where I can then just go to our form. Again, I need to just find our incident date. I need to pull that in. I'll probably go ahead and add a little extra piece here to make sure it's in the proper date format that Workato is expecting. Because if it reads it as a string, as regular characters, then it won't act properly. And then from here, this is going to be super simple. I can just say plus, and then I can say 2 dot, and then I can say what type we want, years.
Susie, there's a question that came in.
Great.
Do you have a general rule of thumb with Filevine fields based on collection or static sections? They're asking due to more variables in collections versus static.
So for different types of fields, are we thinking? Um, there's a bit of a different design you have to do with actions you're taking off of collection items versus actions you're taking off of static sections. Um, but it kind of comes down to what you want the automation actually to do. So for example, with static sections, it's, pretty one-to-one. We're looking for something to come in. For example, with this automation, right? This was going to be something we talk about next, is once we have this set up, we might want to make sure that it doesn't happen again, right? If somebody who comes in who knows that this statute actually should be 4 years comes in and updates the section, we don't want the automation to trigger again from the intake section and replace that information, right? So we would have to put that in. Whereas when you're looking at a collection section, sometimes it can be like it's just when a new item is created, I'm looking to see what information is in there. I'm taking action every time. You might not have that same kind of line of logic. Other than that, the actual types, right? We still have date fields, we still have drop downs, we still have, you know, big old text boxes, stuff like that. A lot of the actual data that's present in a static section and a collection section are kind of mostly the same. Is that kind of what we were thinking?
While we wait for them to respond, can you do automations based on doc gens generated?
There is a docgens generated trigger. We cannot generate docgens, if that makes sense, right? So if we would like to listen for when a docgen gets generated, we can have that and say, okay, this docgen got generated. I need to send Melissa an email every time so she can go look at it, or I need to change the phase of the project that we're in once that's been done, right? So we can take actions off of it, but I can't say, hey, this incident date has been entered. I need to generate this document now, if that makes sense. Okay. We good there? Any follow-up? Okay. I'll say so far so good. Feel free to stop me again though, if that's not what our questions were about. Happy to kind of jump back in. Okay. So going back to kind of our automation, just as we have it laid out here, we can come in here, we can say, hey, we're making our statute of limitations date. It's going to look at that incident date. It's going to make sure it's in the proper format, and then it's just going to add 2 years, right? This is the most simple version. I don't often get to build it out as simply as this, right? Normally people will have to look at multiple states maybe if they have their own code for something like this, right? And so we'd have to do some extra logic to decide, hey, this is what happens if we've identified the correct state as Texas, and this is what happens if we've identified the correct state as Colorado. If those are going to be two different values, or we need to look and see if this is a government claim, or if this, if they have different logic that we need to consider. I also have had several places come to me and say, hey, can we shave a few days off of this just to be extra safe? So even if we're cutting it down to the wire, technically the wire is a little longer.
Another
Um,
question came in. Can
okay.
Workato be used to initiate a report fusion? They think that you answered it with the DocGen question, but they want to make sure. They want to be able to generate a fusion report daily and email it to the team.
That's a great question. So kind of the same similar thing there where we can't take that generate action If you are looking to do something like that, I don't know. This is me taking off my automation hat and putting on my Domo Periscope hat. Is if you're looking to do something like that, if you already have Periscope, I would definitely recommend looking at putting your report fusion in there instead and building it out in Periscope. And then you can automatically send it out from Periscope every day or however often you want. That's one kind of easy solution. Or, for example, sometimes people just like to send out reminders or certain emails where they're like, come in here, you can send emails with links to the projects, things like that. So sometimes even if we can't take like direct action, um, for with our automation, we can still prompt people to take action via an automation if there's nothing that we have available there. So, good question, but kind of similarly, I don't think that's something that we can do right now. Um, Coming back to this, I know we're starting to cut it on time a little. So, again, I probably would not consider this a finished automation. There's some extra logic we could put in. We could put in extra steps to make sure that any manual changes don't get overwritten, anything like that. But this could be a good base, right? You know, we could go ahead and start testing and iterating on it from there. Just to touch on a few more things, and then I'll open it up again, just for kind of our broader questions, is for any automation you build, it's good to think about how you would like to handle errors, right? Um, for example, with an automation like this, if I am trying to run this little piece of code and for whatever reason, let's say this incident date field was actually text and someone just wrote in the word banana, it would fail and say, you didn't give me something I could turn into a date. What do I do now? And you'd have to decide, hey, what do we have? What do we want to happen in that situation, right? A lot of the times, the kind of general umbrella error handling policy is just to send a email out to a responsible person on your team. So that could be IT, that could be the folks who help set up the automation, right? That will give them a link to the failed kind of job in your platform, and then they can manually rerun it, or they could find the person who ran it to begin with and go from there. That's a general one, but you can get really specific, right? If we know a certain step's going to fail, we can have specific error handling for that step to say, if this invalid code comes back, we want to task the person directly who made this. Or in Workato, for example, you also can have a recipe ops recipe that the trigger for that recipe is whenever another one fails. And then you can have a whole kind of system based off of that. Um, Obviously, the best case scenario is you've tested this, you've tested different inputs into the system, right? You've tried it where there is a date, where there isn't a date, where nothing was entered at all. And you can see how the automation reacts. So hopefully you can build that in with the logic, but automations will always fail. They're based off of the API. The API is another piece of software that's running like any others. We've all had our access issues to, you know, YouTube, our emails, everything goes down for a bit eventually, and the API is the same. Sometimes it'll just have a little too much traffic and it might not respond in time, and that will count as a failure and the automation won't finish. So maybe we want to put in extra steps to have it rerun and try again after it waits a little bit to try and account for traffic spikes, things like that. So, um, again, always make sure to set that up. You can have an error handling step like this. For example, Workato, Zapier does this as well. We'll have some basic error handling error handling set up for you where it will email you every time something fails. But this allows you to include like specific information, right, that you might want. So always something to kind of keep in mind. And then just as a last step, it's always helpful to have some sort of documentation. That can be as simple as including a description here. So if people are coming in and looking at your automation environment, they can see a quick description of all of your automations to see what they do. Workato also allows for tags. I think those are great, especially for people who are building in a lot of different templates, right? You need to see at a glance what's working in each template, what's working in multiple templates at the same time if you have some set up to do that. There's different ways to do that. And then you can also have your own list that you can give to folks that they can keep as a part of their Filevine training so folks knows what's automated. That was a lot. I know I was hoping to give us more open time for questions, but I'm a bit of a chatterbox. So I guess I'll leave it there. Any final questions that have come up?
You did get a shout out. You built an automation for a firm and they said 10 out of 10 would recommend. So a personal
Great.
recommendation, which I love. Um, if you all are needing assistance building out these automations, or you're like, hey, I know how to build automations, but I want some expertise, right? Some guidance on the best ways to do this inside of Filevine. That's exactly what we are here for at Vine Skills. We not only can help build these items, but we can help provide that expertise. We have an entire team behind us, so it's not just one person. You really have some confidence kind of in the folks that are doing this work, and again, some additional brains helping to make sure that we're providing the best route for you and your firm. Um, Oh, perfect. Somebody said, let's do some more advanced content like this. We do have a few others coming up, so feel free to check our website. But again, we offer a range of services down from email support to kind of just help guide you throughout, all the way up to us doing everything, testing, running all of the items. So if that's something that you're interested in, feel free to reach out. We'd love to help scope that work for you and get working with you on these items. Our email addresses are just our first name at vineskills.com, so feel free to reach out. Outside of that, we are also going to Lex. I know it's a few months away, so some of you might not be thinking about it, but if you do plan on going to Lex, reach out to Suzy and or myself. We can get you a code so that you can get a discount on those tickets. I'm in a link to where you can kind of purchase them. Again, just our first name at vineskills.com. If you haven't already, feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We put out a lot of really great content, some more advanced content like this on tips and tricks outside of our free help sessions. Follow us on LinkedIn and check. I don't think we have any other socials, but look on those places, look on our website. We put a lot of really great content. Thank you all so much for joining us today, Suzy. As always, thank you so much for providing your wealth of knowledge to us. Hopefully, you all learned something. I know I did. Have a great rest of your week, and hopefully, we'll see you again. All right, bye bye.